Welcome to another webinar of the Amphibian Specialist Group. So this initiative aims to bring together specialists, researchers, enthusiasts from all around the world to discuss amphibian conservation. And today we have with us Chris Worgan. Chris is part of the Newt Conservation Partnership as a project officer since October 2022. And have helped to deliver several compensation projects across South England. And he is here today to talk to us about a pond creation program for the great crested newt in England. Thank you so much, Chris, for being here and accepting the invitation, and the floor is yours.
Thank you, Marissa. I shall share the screen. Okay, just to confirm, everyone can see the slide.
Yes.
Oh,
it's okay.
Thank you. So yes, thank you, Marissa. Thank you for inviting me along today. As Marissa said, my name is Chris Worgan. I'm one of the project officers at the Newt Conservation Partnership. And welcome to a presentation about our work, where we deliver high quality habitats for great crested newt under the NatureSpace compensation schemes. Today's talk, it's about the Newt Conservation Partnership, about who we are, an overview of the schemes, where we work, what we do and the best practice and processes that we follow, and some of the conservation outcomes from these NatureSpace compensation schemes. But first, a little bit about me. This is me on the left, age 10, looking intently into my parents' garden pond. And after a meandering journey over many years, I seem to have gone full circle and still being mesmerised by ponds and pond life. I achieved my Great Crested Newt survey licence in 2018. And as Marissa said, I joined NCP, Newt Conservation Partnership, in October 2022. Then since then, been involved in habitat delivery projects covering 3 counties, primarily across Hampshire in the south of England. So the Newt Conservation Partnership is a community benefit society that was established in 2017 at the very beginning of the NatureSpace district licensing schemes. And our sole purpose is to create and monitor compensation habitat for great crested newt. Our directors are Dr. Tony Gent of Amphibian and Reptile Conservation Trust, Professor Jeremy Briggs of Freshwater Habitats Trust, and Professor Richard Griffiths from the Durrell Institute of Conservation and Ecology at the University of Kent. And all the staff within the Newt Conservation Partnership are seconded from either Amphibian and Reptile Conservation Trust or the Freshwater Habitats Trust. And these are both leading conservation organisations with many years of experience in delivering species conservation and habitat creation. This diagram shows a basic overview of how the schemes work, but there are lots of processes behind each of these boxes. The licence schemes operate through funding from developments, whether that be house building, road or rail improvements, or other infrastructure projects. And then NatureSpace, who manage the scheme, assess the impact of newts and determine the cost of compensating. The developer then pays NatureSpace, and the development works are then covered under licence. Newt Conservation Partnership receives a proportion of the money and creates and restores new habitat. And Newt Conservation Partnership provide landowners with a management agreement, annual payments and advice for 25 years. And we ensure that the amount of delivery is ahead of development impacts, and we'll look at this a little bit later in this presentation. But one thing that's very important to know is that the monies from the developers are paid into a central fund, and there is no direct link between developers and compensation sites. We're currently operating under 3 licence categories. The district's licence scheme is operating across 11 counties in central and southern England, as you can see from the map there on the right. And we're also the compensation delivery partner for the organisational licence for Network Rail nationally, and the National Highways licence covering the southern region. And there are other organisations joining the scheme very soon. Our work as a delivery body is guided by a landscape strategy, so a bigger, better, joined up approach. We use strategic opportunity areas, these are the blue areas on this map, to ensure that we're delivering compensation in the right places. A strategic opportunity area is an area where the addition of new ponds would benefit great crested newt populations, considering things like pond density and existing great crested newt presence. And under the licenses, the requirement is that 60% of our delivery must be within these strategic opportunity areas. We also aim to improve connectivity, so joined up rather than isolated nature reserves. Increasing the number of occupied ponds under the licence. We are committed to create or restore at least 4 ponds for each pond impacted by development. Also increasing the extent of terrestrial habitat. Newts spend about 80% of their life on land, so they need the terrestrial habitat for shelter, foraging, hibernation, etc. And all of our work is underpinned by a habitat suitability model. This is to identify suitable habitat based on several factors, including environmental data, survey records, water quality, existing connectivity, and this is used to assess impacts from development as well as guide us where we should deliver habitat. And that model is ground truthed to ensure the correctness of it, and it's reviewed on a 5-year cycle. And you can see on the image on the right there, so highly suitable habitat is red, amber suitable habitat, etc. So it guides us where the habitat would be better made. So what do? We make ponds, obviously, plus a lot more. So habitat can be created by making new ponds, allowing newts to access previously unavailable habitat, or restore ponds to a level where they are suitable for newt breeding. Today, I'm going to focus on creation rather than the restoration. Terrestrial habitats, that work can include seeding, hedgerow planting, tree planting, natural regeneration. It's very flexible. And all that work is funded by the scheme. And we work in collaboration with landowners and other stakeholders. And there's also long-term monitoring included. And that includes things like compliance, population monitoring, and the wider benefits, which, again, we're going to look at a bit later in this presentation. All of our work follows best practice as set by the lead experts in freshwater and herpetology to ensure that we deliver high quality, clean water ponds on sites where we have already followed a detailed site selection process. But before we look at the site selection process, let's consider what a healthy great crested newt population needs. So well-designed ponds with expansive shallows and drawdown zones, clean, unpolluted water, vegetation for laying eggs, open water for courtship, food source of invertebrates, and ideally no fish. Also terrestrial habitat nearby for cover from predators, for shelter, for feeding, hibernation, so things like rough grassland, scrub and woodland. And also network or clusters of ponds with a mosaic of habitat around means that newts can move safely between those ponds. In order to meet the needs of the healthy great crested newt populations and achieve the wider benefits for biodiversity, the essential components for pond creation and site selection include, as we've said, a clean water source. So we will test water quality on existing water bodies on a site. We will identify where the pond catchment, where the water will flow from into the new ponds. And we'll create complexes of pond rather than a single isolated pond. And those ponds will be designed to be permanent to allow great crested newt to finish their life cycle. These ponds need to be on sites with suitable surrounding terrestrial habitat, as we've said, and a land usage that is conducive to having healthy ponds with low levels of disturbance. We need to consider the geology and hydrology, as we don't line any of our ponds. We rely on the natural substrate. And we'll also obviously consider the impacts or benefits to existing species on the site. We work closely with county archaeologists to ensure that any archaeological risks are identified and mitigated. But ultimately, different sites will have different characteristics, so we have to adapt to the conditions on each individual site. And as we're aiming for a landscape scale habitat delivery, improving connectivity by adding stepping stones and features, again, such as the hedgerows, so that the newts that are spending this large amount of time of their life cycle on land, and to ensure that natural colonisation, our ponds are sited within 500 metres of an existing pond and within a kilometre of an existing record, or within areas modelled as having a high likelihood for newt presence, as we spoke about with the habitat suitability modelling. But making sure that all these points are considered helps to ensure that appropriate sites are chosen and the habitat that's delivered is of high quality with clean water. So from the start of the scheme in 2018 up to December 2024, we've created or restored 485 ponds across 149 compensation sites. As you can see from the graph, there is a focus on pond creation. This is to address the historical pond losses across the landscape. And all ponds from 2018 to 2023 were surveyed as part of the monitoring in 2024. As well as the ponds, we've created 1,410 hectares of terrestrial habitat. And just to put that into perspective, that's almost 1,000 football or rugby pitches. And I mentioned earlier about aiming for delivery to be ahead of the impacts from development. And these graphs show that as at December 2024, there's just under 200 ponds lost or degraded as part of development against the 485 new ponds and 600 hectares of terrestrial lost or degraded against the 1,410 hectares delivered. And this ensures that the compensation habitat delivery is always ahead of the habitat loss in development sites. Now I want to show you what the delivery actually looks like on the ground. This is a good example of creating a mosaic of habitats on one single site. As the map shows, I know the legend is a little bit small on there, but we basically secured an 8-hectare parcel of improved grassland that was previously intensively grazed, as it was a former dairy farm. And we were originally looking at doing 7 ponds across this site, but the early substrate investigations showed that the substrate in the southern area of the field was less reliable. So we adjusted the plan from 7 ponds down to 5 ponds. These ponds were excavated in July 2025, and the other habitat creation works that are ongoing are the tree and hedge plantings and fencing, meadow seeding, areas set aside for natural regeneration. And there's a plan for grazing or a cutting regime on this site to be implemented in the future. This photo shows the removal of the topsoil over the footprint of the 5 ponds. On this site, there was some archaeological risk, so we had an archaeologist on site during the removal of this top layer. Nothing was found, so we continued excavating the ponds. You will notice a long straight line on the left-hand side of that excavation going away from us. This is a land drain, which is another challenge that we find on many of our sites. And these drains are taking water from the field into nearby ditches. These are removed during the pond creation process as we want to retain the water on the land and in the ponds. But there can be a lot, and they can be at different depths, and they can be in different directions. So sometimes it's quite a challenge to find all of them. As we spoke about earlier, the pond design, so these were designed to have extensive shallows, wide drawdown zones, an asymmetrical design, ensuring there's depth of water for the amphibians. And in the middle of the picture on the left, you can see the ponds just starting to fill after the first autumn rains. And if we look closer, you can see some of the design considerations during the creation, such as shallow slopes and the uneven topography. And in the foreground of this same picture, you can see some of the spoil in a line used in readiness for planting a new hedgerow in the winter. And then further in the distance, you can see an area of spoil that was spread thinly and seeded with a native meadow mix. That was done in early autumn. And this site's quite local to me, so very excited to see how this site evolves. Okay. So that was a site created this year with new habitats at the beginning of the journey. So it'd be useful to look at a site that's older so we can see the longer term evolution of the habitat. This was an arable site with land that was very tricky to farm due to heavy soil, waterlogging, had poor yields, and this land was left uncultivated in 2018. Then in 2021, the Newt Conservation Partnership transformed it into a complex of ponds, species-rich grassland, scrub, and hedges. And that was all secured on a long-term agreement for 25 years. Under that agreement, the landowner manages the ponds, although there's very little management that would have been required in the earlier stages. The grassland is managed as a traditional hay meadow with a summer cut, and the site has recently been fenced this year and linked to an adjacent grazing unit. So going forward, there'll be controlled grazing taking place on that site in the future. So for that same site, these are the latest monitoring results. So I'll look at monitoring in a bit more detail later, but these are the results for this particular site. And this shows that in 2025, 4 of those 8 ponds tested positive for great crested newt, the ones with the blue dots. But if we look at the results since creation in 2021, we can see that every single pond has tested positive at least once in the last 3 years, which is a fantastic result. And it demonstrates how newts will use different ponds in different years. Okay. On that same site, these photos demonstrate how one of those ponds has evolved and become vegetated in just a few years. We don't introduce any plants into our ponds, we allow natural colonisation. As you can see, this has developed into a great habitat for freshwater wildlife. And we talk about landscape scale delivery, and this map shows a great example of that happening in practice. The site that we just looked at is the one in the blue box. We're also working with multiple landowners across the region, with most of those compensation sites now positive for great crested newt, those in the red circles. The one that's not circled was created fairly recently. Now, I mentioned that each site is different. So looking at a different environment where we have added ponds to an existing network of in semi-natural woodland. This pond was created back in 2023 on a designated site of special scientific interest after obtaining the consent from Natural England. And the works were planned in collaboration with the site rangers and their winter tree thinning programme. This is a groundwater fed pond, and as you can see, after the initial turbidity in the water due to the excavation works, the sediment settled within a year, and even in the drought year, this year of 2025, this pond still maintained good water levels. And this will be DNA surveyed in 2026, so I'm very keen to see the results of this particular pond. And just as an additional comparison as well, these 2 photos demonstrate the degree of change for this woodland edge pond after just 4 years, where you can see the margins of the pond are now really well vegetated, and the pond is well established. Again, each site is different and has its own characteristics. These photos show a restored ghost pond. A ghost pond is a historic pond that has either been deliberately filled in or lost to succession. And this pond is colonised very quickly with aquatic plants, probably due to the existing seed bank in the soil. And this pond also tested positive for great crested newt in 2025, so really good success. So the monitoring program, it's very extensive to ensure that we're compliant with regulations, so that we can assess colonisation levels and habitat quality, and evaluate the occupancy of our ponds against regional trends, and also to evaluate the wider benefits of the scheme for biodiversity. So to do this, we use 4 monitoring methods: environmental DNA, the genetic material that's shed by organisms in their environment. The ponds are sampled annually, starting in the 2nd year after creation. We also carry out population assessments on a small selection of compensation sites, and we also include any pre-existing ponds within 500 metres of those sites to measure the impacts of our habitat creation on local newt populations. These surveys are repeated every 3 years, and to date they've been carried out across 12 of our sites. The Habitat Suitability Index is a numerical index used by Natural England, and this represents the potential of habitat to support great crested newts. And then the wetland plant surveys enable us to evaluate the biological quality of our ponds. So what are the results of all this monitoring? This graph shows pond occupancy of ponds created or restored up to 2023. And this information looks at multi-year occupancy, so ponds with at least one great crested newt record since 2020. You can see the 70% high occupancy rate from mature ponds, but we expect that some of our ponds will take a number of years to colonise. So you can see that on the lower percentage of colonisation on the ponds created in 2022 and 2023. And as these mature, we would expect those occupancy rates to increase. But it is worth noting that part of the conservation strategy is to attempt to increase the range and distribution. So some ponds would be placed slightly further away from existing populations, and therefore the natural colonisation will take a bit longer of those ponds. And as we saw earlier, newts will use different ponds. So to take account of the variability in the pond level occupancy, we also analyse at site level. So these graphs show the site occupancy rates, again, looking at multi-year occupancy, so sites with at least one great crested newt record since 2020. And that exceptionally high site level of 84% occupancy of the older sites, that really demonstrates the effectiveness of our conservation strategy, which aims to create new habitat and facilitate natural colonisation and expand those local newt populations. So as well as the occupancy rates, let's have a look at some of the other outcomes and benefits of the schemes compared to other available data. Ponds delivered by the Newt Conservation Partnership are twice as likely to be colonised by great crested newts when compared against the National PondNet survey data. Wetland plant surveys show that an average of 17 species in our ponds compared to just 7 species in wider countryside ponds, so more than double the amount of wetland plant species. And these achievements combined show how the scheme supports the government commitment to reduce the risk of species extinction. There was a really interesting paper published online in September that reports about the ongoing decline of widespread amphibians and how they play a critical role in the ecosystems, yet they can be difficult to monitor compared to the rare habitat species. So we record many widespread species in our ponds, including the common toad and the common front, common frog, which the report focused on, but also smooth newt and palmate newt. So finally, just to summarise the NatureSpace compensation schemes, there's no taxpayer funding. It's funded from development impacts. 4 crop ponds are created for each occupied pond at least that are lost to development, so a significant increase at the landscape scale. And we're in it for the long term with legal agreements and monitoring for 25 years. And this long-term approach is key, as pond age is a very important factor when looking at the occupancy rates, as we saw. And there's many wider benefits of our work for many plants and animals. So thank you. I hope you found the talk interesting and useful. There is lots of information on amphibian habitat management on our partner websites that I put on the screen there. I mean, as you can imagine, with 149 sites, there's lots more examples I could share. And there is more information in our annual monitoring reports with lots of glossy photos, case studies, etc. I'm happy to take any questions now. I can be contacted after the webinar on my email address. And please do contact the info@ email address if you're interested in receiving our new monitoring report, which is due to be published very, very soon. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Chris. So anyone who likes to ask questions, you can write them in the chat, or you can just raise your hand and ask the question directly. But to start, Chris, I want to ask you about in pond creation. Do you usually find the location already that will hold water? You never use any kind of plastic layer? Never.
No, so we always rely on the natural substrate or the groundwater that's in the ground. We don't do any lining of ponds.
Okay.
Yeah, so we look for clay in the ground that will hold the water, or
Okay.
as I say, any groundwater. So we've got various GIS layers, spend a long time looking at GIS of geology maps, and then often when we first go to a site, there's a lot of time spent on investigations for each site. So we might carry out some augering to take soil samples to see what the soil is like. Or if we're not sure, we will dig what we call a trial pit and leave that trial pit open. So that's about a 1 meter wide, 3 meter long trench and about 1.5 meters deep. We will leave that trial pit open up to a year, maybe more, to monitor what the water levels do in that area, to make sure that if a pond is created there, it will be successful and it will retain water for the life cycle of the newts on the amphibians.
Okay, it's very interesting. Okay. And sorry, do you plan to do this methodology to other species, to apply this methodology to other amphibian species? For instance, I was thinking about the Natterjay toad, the Epidalea calamita.
Not at the moment, as far as I'm aware, as a project officer. But there's always discussions, to be had. So, at the moment, the schemes are driven by the great crested newt. But obviously, as I've said, the wider benefits and to other amphibians is very notable when we're doing the monitoring. And we record any of the findings that when we're monitoring on our ponds, any common toads, common frogs, smooth newt, palmate newt, other amphibians, that is noted down, as well as other species as well, and other family groups.
Okay.
So
there is also here a
comprehensive database.
A question in the chat. Thank you so much for the great presentation. My question is, do you find the amphibians occurring over time voluntarily, or do you introduce a species or something?
No, so we rely on natural colonization, so we don't introduce anything ourselves, which is why there's so much time spent on looking at identifying the right site, making sure we're putting this habitat in the right places where they will naturally colonize. But no, we don't translocate any newts.
Yeah. And do you find any invasive species that is this problem in England?
In some areas, there are invasive species of amphibian. It's yes, there are. We don't find them as a big problem on the pond creation, again, because we're looking at where we're putting this habitat and making sure that we're putting in areas where it's going to be successful under the scheme.
Yeah, so I imagine if you take into account connectivity between the ponds, for instance,
Yes.
especially plant invasive species that are a very huge problem, you take
Yeah,
that into account.
yes, we do, and especially where, for example, Crested is a plant that we find on some of the sites. So if we're looking at doing habitat creation on a site where we know there's already Crested in a pond, we will consider things like the movement of livestock and that around that area if we decide to put ponds in, to make sure that we're minimizing the risk of any invasive species being able to move into the ponds. But obviously, it's very difficult when birds will bring it, deer will can transport the species. So yes, it is a challenge, definitely.
Yeah.
But we monitor, that's part of the monitoring. We look for these invasive species when we're monitoring as well. And anything that's highlighted, if we find anything in its early colonization, we can try and deal with it then before it gets established in the new ponds.
Yeah, it makes sense. Here's another question. Have you been any luck with new species discovery, non-invasive species discovery?
On plants, yes. There's been
Oh,
some not new species as in completely new species, but new species for a region. Um, and very rare species of plant have started to colonize in some of our ponds. So yeah, again, that taps into the wider benefits. But no, I'm not aware of any completely new species to science that have been discovered as part of our work. Not yet.
yes, here in Europe is very, very difficult. Anyone has more questions? You can also raise your hand if you prefer. Okay, I think we have here many questions in the chat.
Okay.
After constructing created pond, how long does it typically take for them to establish, like sediment settling, clay sealing, and colonization of newts?
Okay, it's a very good question, and it really does depend on the site and the environmental factors. So, as we saw on the groundwater fed pond in that semi-natural woodland, there was a lot of turbidity when we first create a pond, and that will happen whether it's groundwater or rainwater fed, because it obviously you get a lot of you're disturbing a lot of the soil. That turbidity can settle very quickly. In that groundwater example, it had settled very quickly within a year. Sometimes that can take longer because you've got rainfall consistently creating that turbidity. If you've got heavy rain, gradually filling up those ponds, and some of the ponds can take 1-2 years to fill up, depending on the environmental conditions, the weather, the catchment, the size of the catchment for that particular pond. So yeah, it really does vary from site to site. Every site is different, and every site is approached bearing in mind its specific criteria and what's happening on that site, where it is, where the ponds are located in relation to other things around the area. So yeah, and how long does it take to colonize? Again, some colonize very quickly because there's great-crested newts very close by. Others will take longer and rely on a wider dispersal of local newt populations. Yeah, it varies.
Okay.
If
Related to this question, yeah.
if I can just so I just asked this question when you mentioned about the turbidity and stuff. I felt that so we are trying to create some ponds as well, but these are not in areas where a pond actually exists, unlike in your case. So I was wondering, given that they are not water fed, from groundwater fed, and rainwater is primarily what we are looking for the ponds to fill up with water. So would it change? Would it increase the duration then for establishing?
For how long it would take to fill with water?
Yeah, like probably the rain is like every once every month or something like that. Like this is in Australia.
Okay. I mean, yes, it's because we're relying on natural filling of the ponds. It very much depends on the environment and the weather conditions at that particular time. So, for example, this year in the UK, we've had an extremely dry year, and across Europe as well. Very little rainfall since February until about I think it started coming in October, September, October. So a very dry year. So any ponds that created this year, as we saw on some of those photos, they've started to fill, but they will take at least the whole winter to actually get to any certain depth, depending on the rainfall. But if we don't get a wet winter, then it will be into next year that those ponds will fill. And we just wait for that. We just have to wait for that to happen and monitor the water levels. And as part of the monitoring, we'll go back. We'll look at that habitat suitability index, looks at water levels, looks at the drawdown zones. So that's all part of the monitoring, making sure that that habitat is working and delivering for the amphibians.
Right. Yeah. Thanks.
Does that answer your question?
Yes, it does. It does. Yeah, I'm still thinking about all the other possibilities that we might come across, but there, yeah, that does answer the question. Thanks.
All of our ponds are aimed to be offline, so not connected to ditches or streams, so that we haven't got that artificial flow of water coming into the ponds either. It's reliant on the catchment, and the reason we don't do that is because of the risk of bringing in pollution. We don't necessarily know where that water has originated from, so it could be bringing in forms of pollution into the pond, high nutrients. So all of our ponds are offline, isolated from any water sources, streams and ditches, unless we know exactly where that water is coming from.
Does that also avoid siltation kind of issues as well?
Yeah, that is a risk. Yeah, absolutely. If you are connecting to a stream, yes, you'll get siltation happening quicker. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Do you want to, because it's your questions in the chat, right? Do you want to ask them directly?
Yeah, surely. Yeah, that'll be good. So this next question that I have is regarding like any other predators or invasive species that are not in terms of plants, but probably fish or etc. Because we are trying to build ponds closer to streams. So like you wouldn't want anything that is competing with the specific species that you're looking at, the target species, to get into that ponds as well. So is there anything that you employ for that?
Absolutely. I mean, that's one other reason why we don't connect to any streams and ditches, so that we don't get fish coming into the ponds. We create the ponds unsuitable for wildfowl and fish as well, so to reduce the amount of disturbance. But yeah, we aim to create ponds without fish. Stickleback is a predatory fish that is native, and one will be in some of our ponds that can be brought in by other species. But other than that, very much target having a fish-free pond.
Right. Is it with like the depth of the pond or something like that? Is that the way that you restrict?
Yeah, I mean, the ponds are designed in such a way that they're less suitable for fish. So we don't design them as fish ponds. The depth of a pond probably about 1 meter on average of our ponds, with lots and lots of shallow areas where all the biodiversity is. So they're not designed to be attractive for fish colonization, if that were to happen. Again, it's something that we monitor under the Habitat Suitability Index. We look at if there's any evidence of fish presence. We look at evidence of disturbance. So we will put ponds on areas where there is some public access. So we have to monitor things. For example, dogs going into ponds will obviously cause disturbance as well and bring in chemicals. So that's also something that we bear in mind, and we will fence off a pond if we need to. If that's a high risk, then we will mitigate that as best we can by fencing.
Yeah, fair enough. What about other frogs that might compete, which probably are like generalistic? I know that you would ideally not want them to want to like restrict any other frog species, but then like, do you have any methods that you employ for that?
Yeah, yes, we do consider that. Again, if we've got records, we'll look at what other species are already in the ponds or locally. And if there's a large population of invasive species, then we may consider not to do the habitat there, because whilst we may be expanding the range of great crested newts, we may also be expanding the range of an invasive species. So all these things are considered in our pre-site investigations. There's not a one answer that fits all. It really depends on what level of risk there is for any new habitat creation. Is there barriers that will prevent those invasive populations getting to our new habitat? If there's not, then we will consider, whether we will do that work there or look at an alternative part of the site.
Yeah, fair enough. The other question that I had is when I'm guessing that you do look at the population numbers or abundances in the ponds that are close by and the ponds that you've created. In which case, would you tend to see that the newt populations change or sort of decrease initially when you create ponds because they have like no more ponds to colonize, and then gradually increase, or do you don't see any difference in the natural ponds there?
I'd have to look at the data. I mean, there's obviously a lot of data that's collected over many years since the start of the scheme, so I'd have to look at that data. So I might have to come back to you on that question. But certainly from my experience, I haven't seen that occur at the moment. But I can certainly look into it and give you a more comprehensive answer.
Yeah, fair enough. And the final question that I have is a bit more peculiar, but we are trying to have some metal tanks that we've put in as constructed ponds. Have you had any experience with anything like that, which mimics similar to a natural pond, but then it's like a tank?
When you say metal tanks,
Yeah.
on the amphibians, or in the what do you
Like,
mean? Sorry.
yes, so we just put the tanks in the ground. So it would, instead of digging the thing, we have like a tank that is
Okay, tanks rather than,
yeah.
sorry, I thought you said tags.
Right.
Yes, tanks.
Oh no, tanks. Yeah.
So very steep-sided, a bit like our trial pits. Steep-sided.
Yeah.
It's I mean, all of our ponds when we created are designed with shallows and with amphibians and wildlife in mind. So certainly steep sides is not something that we would put onto our ponds.
Right.
And we haven't. Some of the ponds that we do survey that have steep sides will have newts and other amphibians, as we know. If that's what's available, that's what the wildlife will use. But certainly for the compensation that we put in the ground, it's very much follows the best practice designs.
Fair enough. Yeah. Thanks. Thanks for patiently answering all the questions.
Okay.
There is here one final question in the chat. Is there a possibility that the population will be stable and that can be kept on their own, or do you need to keep doing perpetually? I think maybe restoration.
Do we just need to keep doing it? Well, I suppose we like to think eventually one day it'll be self-sustaining and widespread with all the connectivity. I mean, that's the idea with the landscape scale approach, is creating a landscape where wildlife can move between these areas and extend their range, rather than being constrained by urban sites. But I mean, long term, obviously we have long-term agreements for 25 years. So we are very much looking at making this a sustainable program that will keep the population stable, increasing, and then stable going forward. but I can't. Yes, it will carry on.
Is there any other question? Okay. So if you have any additional questions, you can contact Chris also to the email that he showed to receive the report and as well. Thank you so much, Chris, again for being here, and to all of you that are interested in this subject. And yeah, keep in touch for the next webinars. Thank you and have a great week.
Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.